Hey, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be looking at how to implement a robust collision detection system for our platformer game. You don't have to have watched my previous videos to understand what we're doing here, but I definitely recommend watching that too. Links are in the description. In this new series of videos, I'll be showing how to implement game and engine features using C++. If you can think of any cool ideas or game features, please write them in the comments, as I bet they would make for excellent tutorials in upcoming videos. Previously, we used a pretty simple AABB check, which was entirely based around the SDL getRectIntersection function. This was sufficient to get us started and jumping around the level, but the simplicity of the approach certainly had its issues. When we only check if two rects are intersecting, we end up without enough information to make a proper decision on how to resolve the collision appropriately. Our simple approach involved the following. First, taking the player character and checking their collider box for intersections with the level tiles. Upon finding an intersection, we would decide how to move the player in order to resolve the collision. This was done by looking at the rectangle representing the amount of intersection between the two objects, then taking the smaller value between the two axes of intersection. In the presented case, the x-axis or width of the rectangle is clearly smaller than the y value, which means that we would push the player horizontally in the opposite direction to move them out. Along with that, we would stop the player's momentum by zeroing out the velocity in that particular axis. Great, but let's take a look at what happens during a frame of the game. The player character walks along the level, and during each frame, we're integrating his velocity into the position. Except we also have the force of gravity pushing the player character down during the same frame. And this all happens before drawing the character at the end of the frame. The character is moved forward, then down a little due to gravity, but the collision system ends up pushing them back out, and the sprite is finally drawn at their final position, and the player has no idea this even happened. Except we run into an issue when using the simplistic approach you saw before. Look at this scenario. The player has been pushed into the ground, as expected, and is intersecting with the tile directly below him, as well as the tile directly in front of that one. Even though it's just a little, when our game loop checks the player's intersections, it may process that collision first and will stop the player's movement and resolve along the shorter axis of intersection, that axis being the x-axis. As expected, the character's velocity will be affected on the x-axis, and the player would feel the character just suddenly stop moving for seemingly no reason. Instead of just integrating the entire velocity directly into the player's position each frame and then checking for a collision, we'll integrate each axis separately, first starting with the x-axis, checking for collisions after that movement, and then we would move on to the y-axis, doing the same once again. In this case, we'd find that there is a collision due to the gravity pushing us downwards. Doing it this way achieves exactly what we want. Our player moves forward successfully, then gravity pulls us down ever so slightly, but the collision system resolves this immediately before the character is drawn on screen. You might say to yourself, why not just stop applying gravity when the player has touched down on the ground? And this is not a bad suggestion, but you do this as a potential optimization, not as a solution to the problem I'm presenting. This example with gravity is just one of the small edge cases you can run into if you don't integrate velocity appropriately and check for intersections carefully. Before we move on to looking at the implementation code for this video, please remember to support the channel by subscribing. You can also support me using my Ko-fi links and by joining the Discord community. Links are in the description. Thank you. Now that we've visually seen the problem and solution, let's have a look at some of the code to understand the implementation. I'm not going to show all of the code driving the game, of course. Please feel free to watch my SDL game development video for an in-depth tutorial on building everything. The update function is called for every single object in the game, including the player character. After capturing the movement direction, we get to the code handling physics and collision detection. The first thing we do here is update the player's velocity based on the movement direction and their acceleration, potentially clamping the speed if we're reaching the maximum. The next block of code applies the gravity I mentioned earlier. It simply adds a downward pointing vector of an arbitrary magnitude to the current velocity of the object. I'm using a value of 500 here and scaling it with delta time because this game doesn't require accurate physics. Most games don't require strict accuracy, in fact, but rather the right feel. If you're working on something truly physics-based, you'd need to factor in mass and calculate force much more carefully. Before we integrate the current object's velocity, we make a copy of its position into a variable called tentative position. We call this tentative as it's the position we'd like to move to, but may not be able to due to collisions. We also have an array of 4 bools to represent the state of contacts at the object's 4 sides: top, right, bottom, and left in that order. Each bool is initialized to false for the frame. After the collision checks, it'll contain the snapshot of the contacts for this object in this moment in time. When we detect that the object is making contact with something on any of those sides for the current frame, we set the appropriate contact point to true. At the end of the loop, we'll be checking these current contacts with the object's existing contacts that are stored in the game object. Now we can start integrating our velocity per axis and checking for collisions. As you can see, we've got a for loop which simply iterates over each axis. For our 2D game, this will be twice for the x and y axes. Once inside the loop, we add the delta time scaled velocity value for the current axis to the tentative position. The axis loop counter variable will either be a 0 for the x-axis or 1 for the y-axis. After moving our object for a given axis, we loop over all objects in the scene and check our current object against each one for collisions. At the moment, we're doing this brute force check on every object, though we'll soon add spatial partitioning in order to optimize the collision system. It's always critical to make sure that you get this code correct first, even if it's unoptimized or slow. Writing your physics and collision detection code for the first time, along with spatial structures and algorithms for optimizations, creates a lot of room for error and hard to find bugs. Always do things one step at a time and focus on correctness first, get it right, and then optimize. As we iterate over every object, we make sure that the object we're checking for collisions against isn't our current object by comparing their memory addresses, as well as making sure that it has an actual collider. Every game object has a collider rect, which allows us to define a particular portion of the sprite to be collidable, rather than the entire sprite. We cover this in more detail in the original video, and I show why it's important to be able to define better shapes for our collidable objects. Please watch that video if you need more information. If we find an object that has a collider, and it isn't the current object we're processing, we create a couple of rects that we can use for the AABB intersection testing. AABB stands for Axis Aligned Bounding Box, which means we're testing if two rects, which have no rotation applied to them, this being the axis aligned part, are overlapping. I'm using SDL3 rect objects, which hold the x and y positions, along with the width and height of each rect, using floats. We create rect A, which uses the current object's tentative position, offset by the collider's position. For the size of the rect, we use the collider's dimension directly here, for the reason I mentioned earlier. Similarly, we create rect B, which is the AABB representing the second object. With those two objects in place, we can do a simple intersection test between them and store the intersection amount in the overlap vector. The intersect AABB function is quite simple. It calculates the extents of each object's rects in each axis. This will give us the minimum and maximum extent of each object in each axis. For the minimum x value, we simply use the x position. And for the maximum value, we add the width to that position. The same is done for the y-axis. Minimum y is just the y position, maximum y adds the height value. When AABB testing, we have to ensure that the two boxes are intersecting on all axes. If the intersection is only on the x-axis, then it's clear that they're not overlapping. The same can be said if the intersection is only on the y-axis. Once we find an overlap in both axes, we know that there's a collision for us to resolve. To do that, we need to calculate the amount of overlap between the two boxes. You can think of the overlap area as a third box that is produced using the difference between boxes A and B, using some subtraction. We start by calculating the min and max values per axis for both objects. Then we can check both axes for an overlap. If min xa is less than max xb, and max xa is more than min xb, while min ya is less than max yb, and max ya is more than min yb, then the two objects are overlapping. Calculating the overlap itself is pretty straightforward. Taking the x-axis as an example, subtract rect B's minimum x from rect A's maximum x. Also subtract rect A's minimum x from rect B's maximum x, and we'll have two values that we need to decide between. Which of those two values we take for that axis depends on which side rect A is intersecting from, the left or the right when looking along the x-axis. The smaller of the two values tells us which one that is. The process is identical for the y-axis. The overlap values are written to our overlap vector, and we return out of this function with a value of true in the case of a collision. Now that we've detected a collision and have the overlap calculated, let's produce some more information about the collision so that we can respond to it correctly. The first thing we need to know is which side of our object is colliding. A good way to figure this out is to simply check where the object was prior to moving. This will tell us which way our object moved in order to end up in a collision, and in turn, which side actually collided. Remember that we're splitting the movement per axis, so let's first look at the x-axis. If we take our object's original x position and add to it the collider's x position and width, we get the max x value of our object prior to it moving along the x-axis. If this value is less than or equal to the minimum x value of the object we collided with, then we must have been to the left of that object prior to colliding. This would mean that we're colliding using the right side of our object. On the flip side, if the minimum x value of our object was greater than or equal to the maximum x value of the other object, then we must have been to the right of that object prior to collision, implying that our left side is colliding with it. This same logic applies across the y-axis. If our maximum y is less than or equal to the other object's minimum y, we must have been above it and must be colliding using our bottom edge. If our minimum y is greater than or equal to the other object's maximum y, we must have been below and colliding using our top edge. For each possible collision, we need to also store the normal vector of the surface we're colliding with. Normal vectors are unit vectors that point in the direction that a surface is facing. So this will tell us which way the surface is facing that we collided with, and will make it easier for us to resolve and respond to the collision. If we're colliding using our right side, then the normal vector of the surface we're colliding with must be pointing to the left, in the negative x. If we're colliding using our left side, then the surface normal points to the right, in the positive x. If we're colliding with something below us, then the normal vector of that surface points in the negative y. Remember that negative y is up in SDL. Finally, if we're colliding with something above, then the surface normal must point downwards, in the positive y. In each of these cases, we also want to ensure we set the appropriate contact points to true. Comparing this frame's contact state with the object's previous contact state will allow us to trigger various events as the contact states change. This includes things like starting to fall, landing on the ground, hitting a wall, etc. For example, if the last known bottom contact was false, and during this frame we find that it's true, we know that the object just hit the ground. This lets us monitor for contact changes frame over frame and only emit events when needed, rather than spamming them constantly. We now have everything we need to resolve and respond to the collision. Calling the collision response function is where we'll handle all of this. We pass in everything we'll need, including the tentative position, normal vector, amount of overlap, and the current frame's delta time. We handle the contact points further down in this code, so we're not passing that in. Once inside that function, we can see how simple things are now. Resolving the collision entails moving our object out of the colliding state based on the amount of overlap we found during testing. We have the normal vector, which points away from the surface we collided with, and the overlap amount that we calculated during the AABB test. The product of those two results in a vector with a direction and length that is just right for moving our object out of the colliding position. Adding that vector to the tentative position, which we passed in by reference, is all we need to do to move the object. I've placed this bit of code in a lambda so that I can call it from various places inside this collision response function, without repeating myself. I also have a lambda called clearVelocity, which simply checks if the collision was horizontal or vertical, and cancels the object's velocity appropriately. This is important so that we can stop the object from continuing to accelerate after it's collided with something. Further down, we can see how these lambdas are used. If the current colliding object is the player, and the player is colliding with a level tile, we clear the velocity and resolve the collision directly using our lambdas. If we're handling a bullet collision, we have another lambda that I use multiple times in this code. All it does is disable the bullet's physics, change its state, as well as the sprite sheet and animation to reflect that the bullet is exploding on impact. Then the bullet's collision is resolved and its velocity is cleared as per usual. You can see how this lambda is called right here when we detect that a moving bullet has collided with the level tile. In an upcoming video, we'll take a look at how to use an event queue to write this code in a much more scalable way, allowing our game engine to respond to collisions without tightly coupling everything together. Using events, the audio system can play back a sound effect to reflect the collision, or the damage system can generate damage based on the bullet's properties without keeping all of this code together in a single function, making things much more decoupled and easy to write. Heading back to our main collision handling code, after testing for and resolving the collisions, we can use our object's contacts for this frame to detect various collision events. In this example, we're checking if the current frame's bottom contact is true and the object's previous contact was false. This contact's change of state from false to true tells us that the object just landed on something. In the case that this object is the player, we can set the player's state back to idle or running depending on if they have a movement direction. I've also left a blank placeholder showing you how you can detect if the player has left the ground after falling off a platform, for example. This is where you can change the player's animation to a falling one, or where we'll trigger a falling event when we add the event system. After comparing the current contacts to the previous ones and triggering events as needed, we can store this frame's contacts into our object so that the next frame we can compare them against the new contacts. After all this is done, all we do is update the object's position using the tentative position we've been updating throughout this process. Later in the code, the game will draw the sprite using the object's position field, and all of our work here will be reflected on screen. That about covers everything I wanted to show today. I really hope you guys found this video useful and the format easy to follow. I aim to make many more of these videos, all aiming at implementing various game and engine features rather than just teaching API and function calls. If you're into this kind of content, please like and subscribe, leave your comments down below, and share this video. This will really help me grow the channel further and give me much more incentive to produce more of these videos. Thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.